You've started writing a family history. You've added meaningful historical context. You're in the chronological part of the story, and yet something feels off. The issue may not be your research. It may not even be your writing. It may be that your chapter has no job. In storytelling, we often hear that every story needs a beginning, middle, and end, with rising action, climax, and resolution. But what many writers overlook is that individual chapters inside a larger story have work to do as well. Each chapter needs a purpose. While revising one chapter in my ancestor, William James Townsend's story, I realized I had built a chronological chapter. And to be fair, chronology is better than simply saying, William served in the military, moving on. But the chapter still wasn't landing. So today, I want to show you how I figured out the real job of that chapter and how that one decision transformed it from nice to much better in about an hour. So today is another one of my Write With Me series video, and we're going to dive into the key takeaway. A chapter does more than store facts. A chapter needs to serve your reader's interest. Now, in a previous video, Don't Write Your Family History Until You Decide These Things, I mentioned that some decisions are about giving chapters a focus: generational, biographical, survival themes. These are our containers for your family history narrative, but we're lacking a task for the job to do within Generation 1 or enlistment. In the video that said this one change fixed my awkward family history chapter, I teased that chapters need jobs when I talked about bridge chapters. Chapters that help you transition from one segment of a story to another. And also, this can change how we tell a story. So sometimes we're going to zoom into a scene, and sometimes we're just going to do the chronological telling of a story because there's so much action taking place. But now we know what the container is and what order we're telling the story, but we're still lacking the job of a chapter. So let's show you a bad chapter example. We have a chapter and know we're going to tell the story in timeline order, but the story's kind of boring. This chapter covered the moment William and his brother Milby entered the Civil War service. And there is a lot of material to draw from: being at Camp Chase, processing military paperwork, doing medical inspections, family worries back home, railroad travel, government telegram, departure orders. Are you getting the idea that it's a brain dump? It is a little bit all over the place. There is historical context. There is a timeline. Have lots of details that builds the story from the war breakouts chapter and before we go to the assignment in West Virginia chapter. But now we need to revise the chapter. How will you know what the chapter job is? Let's talk a little bit about storytelling theory. A chapter should cover some ground by revealing what, the facts of the story, now what, which leads to the next state of the story, and so what? Why does any of this matter to the reader? A chapter loses purpose when you can't answer these questions. And the clues as to why these answers are lacking are the following. You have lots of information, but the chapter feels like a textbook, not a novel. Maybe a kinder way of saying it is you're very genealogically and academically inclined. You have a lot of details, but the story isn't going anywhere, or worse, many places at once. Well, try this test. If someone asked you what this chapter is about, could you answer in one sentence? If not, the chapter is likely jobless. Once you've clued in that your chapter is lacking a job, even though it has a focus, what are some common jobs a chapter could half. A chapter might reveal change. A farm boy becomes a soldier. A widow becomes head of a household. A man now has to go to jail after his sentencing. Change. A chapter might advance the story. Marriage, migration, enlistment, bankruptcy, death. Man, that's a story. But the chapter is going to talk about something that advances to the next part of the story. Sometimes we're going to slow down in the progress of time and deepen someone's character. You may discuss courage, humor, stubbornness, loyalty. Some chapters build context: war, drought, religion, industry. Now, this was one after Jen Baldwin's video where I was writing about Archie, her fourth great grandfather. We talked about the suspension of habeas corpus. We talked about how over time there was this impression by people in England who thought the potato famine was a God's will against the Christian followers in Ireland. It didn't fit yet in the chapter about his trial. And later he moves to Wales. But in the years between his first prison sentence and his second arrest, there was context that we needed to gather in order to prepare us for the next chapter. So sometime your ancestor may lightly be in that chapter, but that chapter is about building context because you need it for what comes next. Another chapter might be clarifying relationships. Who mattered most in this season of life? And how did they come into the story with your ancestors? What were some of the dynamics of them coming together? And the other chapter job is a bridge. And I talked about that in the previous video, so I won't cover it too much here. Depending on where you are in your family history writing, know this: not every chapter carries the same weight, but you should know why every chapter exists. So now let's try to figure out what this chapter for my ancestor should be doing. And we'll start by asking the question: does this chapter reveal change? Yes, William is going through the process of enlistment and leaves to go do his unit assignment. That's a change. Does this chapter advance the story? Yes, William can't go to the Civil War battle assignment until he finished the details in this chapter. However, this is probably a secondary job to the primary job of change. Does this chapter deepen character? No. Since I can't get inside William's head, I don't have any journals or first accounts of his story. I can't tell you if he's a saint or codger. Does this chapter build context? A little. The chapter has context, but it doesn't world build like the bridge chapter right before. Does it clarify relationships? No. It includes some decision makers, the role of the staff of the regiment, but the chapter isn't about clarifying relationships. And finally, does this chapter serve as a bridge? No, that was the chapter before. The bridge between childhood, establishing the Civil War has happened, bridging into the account of he is serving in the military. So in one sentence, what is this chapter's job? Turn William and Melby from waiting recruits into soldiers headed to war. Now that we know that, all the other writing decisions were easy. So now I'm going to bullet point what chapter 4 is going to do. What details support the job of turning him from a recruit into a soldier headed for war? Sleeping on hard ground, standing in line for medical exams, signing muster rolls, receiving ill-fitting uniform, getting his rifle, marching through town, boarding the train. All of those details are setting aside the comforts of home and preparing for life as a soldier. In other words, change. But knowing what the chapter should do helps you get your brain thinking what needs to be spotlighted, what needs to be a supporting actress or actor, and what needs to go somewhere else or not be in the story at all. Now that I know the job, I can figure out an outline for the chapter and the theme to reinforce. So, what transforms William from showing up to enlist to leaving aboard a train? Initially, I had these 5 subheadings in the chapter: final days, hurry up and wait, becoming a soldier, and so forth. What if we make it better? Let me know in the feedback if you like the second set: adjusting to military life, hurrying up to wait, looking the part, and so forth. I love patterns. So I love the ing ending repetition in the subheadings. But can you now see the change taking place? He's adjusting to the lifestyle, looking the part, and he left with a step or two in between. So now we can revise each section to accomplish the goal of change. For instance, leaving on assignment begins with uniform issued and weapons finally in hand. The Ohio 133rd received the order it had been expecting for days. And then it ends, while aboard the train, the men likely discussed their primary mission: protecting the B&O track, which served as the Union's vital supply artery. Confederate raids repeatedly targeted weak points along the line, and commanders feared the supply coaches and rail connections could fail into enemy hands if reinforcements didn't arrive in time. Now we need to get William and Milby back into the story. For William and Milby, the past week had been filled with marching, waiting, examinations, signatures, and so forth. Those preparations now receded behind them. Ahead lay contested country, military duty, and the first true test of the decision they had made when they answered the call to serve. Now, I still have a matter at hand of AI helping me in this draft. I fought with AI a bit when it wanted to remove my voice entirely. But do you see that the job of the section of the chapter, it's just the arc within a section, but there are statements inserted into the other sections that touch on change. By the end of May, William and Milby had done little that would appear remarkable in a military record. Around them, William and the other enlisted men continued the ordinary business of waiting. In only a few days, the brothers had moved from laborers answering a call for short-term service to armed members of a Union regiment. These transition statements within the subsections reinforces the job of this chapter of being change. If a chapter within your story has a lot of great content, but it's meandering and reporty and academic, ask yourself, what's the job of this chapter? Reveal, advance, deepen character, build context, clarify relationships, or bridge the story. Because once you know that, the next step is to cut the clutter without losing the depth in your story. And to do that, we will have it in a future video. So be sure to check the link in the description box below for the Write With Me series. If you're writing your own family history, tell me in the comments, what chapter are you struggling with right now? Or what are some things you have done to give your chapters a job? I'll see you in the next Write With Me video. Remember to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe on your way out. Then go write your family history.